You think they're missing you? You think those late-night texts are a sign of a broken heart? Let me be very clear. The person you walked away from isn't mourning you. They are mourning the loss of the mirror you provided, and they are currently burning your world down because they can't handle the reflection. If you want to know what actually happens behind those closed doors when you finally stop playing their game, we need to talk about the 5 stages of their regret. It's not love, and it's certainly not remorse. It's a tactical retreat. Most people mistake a narcissist's panic for growth. They see a Hoover attempt and think, maybe they've changed. But when you understand the mechanics of their psyche, the way they process the rejection of their false self, the mask slips. It isn't personal. It's a structural collapse. Today, we're dismantling exactly what goes on in their mind during these 5 stages so you can stop wondering and start healing. When you choose to walk away from a narcissistic individual, you are essentially initiating the collapse of the primary architecture they have built to sustain their sense of self. It is critical to understand that for a person with this personality structure, you were never truly seen as an autonomous human being with your own needs, feelings, and boundaries. Rather, you were perceived as a functional component, a reliable source of validation, and a mirror that reflected back a grandiose, idealized version of them. When you exit the dynamic, you aren't just ending a relationship. You are abruptly severing their access to the fuel, the admiration, the attention, and the constant confirmation of their superiority. That keeps their fragile ego inflated and their internal shame suppressed. This creates a profound state of crisis because the narcissist's psyche is not built to process abandonment or rejection as a normal life event. Because they lack a stable, internal sense of self-worth, they rely entirely on external validation to regulate their mood and self-image. By leaving, you have removed their primary mechanism for emotional regulation. The result is a total ego collapse, where they are suddenly forced to confront the void that exists within them, a reality they have spent their entire lives running from. This is not the same as a healthy person feeling sad or heartbroken. It is a desperate, existential panic, because they are now forced to face the silence and the lack of external reinforcement that they have been actively avoiding for years. During this stage of ego collapse, they do not experience genuine regret or introspective guilt, as those emotions require a level of empathy and self-awareness they do not possess. Instead, they experience a raw, primitive rage at the perceived theft of their property. They view your departure as a personal affront and a malfunctioning of the world order they have created. The collapse forces them to panic, as they are now left alone with the very thing they fear most, their own true self, devoid of the projections and manipulations that previously masked their emptiness. This realization is purely functional for them. They do not miss the person you are, but they are absolutely terrified of the absence of the utility you provided. They are now left scrambling to fill the vacuum you left behind, not because they care about you, but because they are physically and psychologically incapable of existing in a state of self-contained stability. Once the initial disbelief that you have actually escaped their control begins to crack, the narcissist shifts into a state of weaponized anger. In this stage, anger is not a simple emotional expression or a reaction to hurt. It is a calculated, strategic, and often aggressive tool of emotional coercion. Because they view you as an extension of themselves, a tool designed to serve their needs. Your decision to leave is not seen as a healthy boundary or a choice, but as an act of rebellion, betrayal, or theft. They cannot fathom a reality where you have the agency to determine your own worth or future, so they interpret your departure as a deliberate insult intended to humiliate them. This rage is often disproportionate and terrifyingly cold. It serves several immediate tactical functions. It is designed to shatter your resolve, induce fear, and re-establish the power dynamic that you disrupted. By unleashing a torrent of fury, they are attempting to frighten you back into submission, hoping that the intensity of their reaction will make you regret your choice and beg for the conflict to stop. They may utilize threats, verbal abuse, or aggressive intimidation to make your life as difficult as possible, essentially trying to prove that you made a mistake by leaving. They want you to feel that the cost of your freedom is too high to pay. Furthermore, This stage of weaponized anger is a necessary defense mechanism for them to externalize the intense shame they feel from your rejection. Rather than internalizing the pain of the breakup, they project all of their feelings of inadequacy onto you. By framing you as the villain, the disloyal one, or the cause of all their suffering, they avoid having to confront their own role in the destruction of the relationship. They need to feel that you are the aggressor so they can maintain their own image as the innocent victim or the misunderstood hero. This rage is not a sign of deep connection. It is a violent reaction to losing control over their environment. Everything they do in this phase is meant to destabilize you and force you to retreat from your position of independence, as they cannot tolerate the autonomy of a person who has seen behind the mask and decided to walk away. When the initial eruption of weaponized anger fails to intimidate you into returning to the fold, the narcissist shifts gears with clinical precision into the phase of strategic bargaining, commonly known as the hoover. This is often the most confusing and dangerous stage for the person attempting to heal, as the individual who was just moments ago attacking your character may suddenly transform into the most apologetic, loving, and self-reflective version of themselves. It is crucial to internalize that this is not a genuine awakening or a sincere desire for reconciliation. There is no transformative epiphany occurring in their psyche. There is only a cold, calculated assessment of what is required to regain access to their lost supply. They will pull from a library of past experiences, recycling the specific promises, grand gestures, or emotional vulnerabilities that worked to pull you in during the early days of the relationship. They might promise to finally go to therapy, blame their behavior on external stressors like work or past trauma, or shower you with gifts and affection to disarm your skepticism. The goal here is to manufacture a new beginning that feels safe enough to lure you back into their sphere of influence. This is a tactical maneuver designed to silence your boundaries and re-establish the status quo where they hold the power and you provide the sustenance. By pretending to acknowledge their mistakes, they are not actually taking accountability. They are merely using the language of accountability as bait. If they apologize, it is a hollow performance, devoid of the necessary behavioral changes that characterize real growth. They are gambling on your empathy, banking on the fact that you want to believe the person you loved, the one they mimicked so perfectly, is still in there somewhere. They don't want you back because they have developed a capacity to cherish or respect you. They want you back because you are a known entity who has already been conditioned to provide specific emotional benefits. Every word they speak during this phase is scripted to bypass your logic and trigger your sentimentality. They are not trying to mend a relationship. They are trying to repair their own comfort, and they will discard the facade the very moment you have been successfully pulled back into their trap, as the underlying lack of empathy remains entirely unchanged. When the tactics of intimidation and manipulation fail to bring you back into the cycle, the narcissist shifts into the phase of pathological devaluation and character assassination. This is a cold, strategic pivot where they recognize that you are no longer a source of useful validation, so they transition from trying to recruit you back to actively destroying your reputation. This is not done out of a desire for justice or a reaction to a specific wrong. It is a defensive maneuver to protect their fragile, reconstructed ego from the reality that you rejected them. By turning you into the villain, they are able to insulate themselves from the crushing shame of being discarded by someone who was supposed to be their subordinate or their object. The smear campaign is typically executed with calculated cruelty and often involves a mix of truth, half-truths, and outright fabrication. They will reach out to mutual friends, family members, or even colleagues, weaving a narrative that paints you as unstable, vindictive, or the one who actually abused them. By preemptively defining the narrative of the breakup, they ensure that if you ever try to speak your truth or share your experience, you will appear bitter or retaliatory to those who have already heard their version of events. This effectively isolates you from your support systems, which is a key goal for someone who cannot handle being seen as the architect of their own relational failures. This phase is fundamentally about externalizing their internal brokenness. They are incapable of holding themselves accountable for the collapse of the relationship, as that would require them to face the void at their core. Instead, they project their own toxic traits onto you. If they were the one who was unfaithful, they will accuse you of cheating. If they were the one who was controlling, they will call you suffocating. They are essentially performing a psychological surgery, carving out the parts of their own character that they despise and sewing them onto your image. This ensures that their own self-narrative remains pristine in their mind, while you are forced to deal with the fallout of their lies. It is a deeply dehumanizing process, but it is entirely consistent with their need to maintain a position of superiority and moral victory, regardless of the destruction left in their wake. If you're currently in the middle of a discard or a difficult separation, I want you to hit that subscribe button right now. We cover the tactical side of detaching from toxic dynamics every single week, and I don't want you to miss the tools you need to stay firm when the guilt tripping starts. The final stage in this post-discard cycle is the calculated erasure, where the narcissist attempts to rewrite history to signal that you were never significant to them in the first place. Once they realize that the smear campaign has either succeeded or is no longer an effective use of their energy, they pivot to a performance of absolute indifference. This is not the healing of a person who has processed a loss. It is a defensive, rigid posture intended to convince themselves and the world that you were merely a temporary fixture in their life, a disposable object that was easily replaced. They will often quickly move on to a new target, not because they have truly moved forward, but because they are physically unable to sustain themselves in the absence of a live source of attention. This replacement is never about finding a better partner or seeking a deeper connection. It is entirely utilitarian. They are looking for a new mirror that is currently unblemished by the reality of their patterns. By parading this new individual in front of you, often through social media or mutual circles, they are attempting to prove that you were not special, that you were easily swapped out, and that your absence had no impact on their internal state. This performative behavior is a desperate bid to maintain the illusion of their own self-sufficiency. If they can act as if you never existed, or as if your departure was a triviality, they successfully soothe the bruised ego that was wounded by your original exit. Ultimately, this stage reveals the tragic emptiness of their existence. While you are experiencing the genuine, albeit painful, process of moving on and integrating the lessons of the relationship, they remain trapped in a perpetual loop of seeking external validation. They do not get over a person, they simply move on to the next source of supply. In their mind, the new person is just a new tool, and your memory is something they must actively suppress because it carries the risk of reminding them of the time their control failed. The calculated erasure is their way of burying the truth of their own vulnerability. It is a hollow victory, however, because while they are busy performing this charade for others, they are still fundamentally unable to achieve the inner peace or authentic self-worth that comes from facing reality without the need for constant external reinforcement. In the context of this cycle, the sixth stage represents the inevitable return to the void. While you are busy building a life defined by your own values, boundaries, and genuine self-worth, the person you walked away from is left to grapple with the inescapable reality of their own internal architecture. This stage is not one of growth, but of stagnation. It is the point where the dust settles and the narcissist is forced to face the silence left in your absence. Because they are unable to self-soothe or generate their own sense of self-esteem, they are fundamentally incapable of moving toward authentic independence. Instead, they remain tethered to the same broken patterns that necessitated your departure in the first place, ensuring that their future relationships will inevitably mirror the exact dysfunctions that destroyed yours. This is the most critical realization for your own recovery. Their life after you is not a journey of evolution, but a repetitive loop of tactical survival. They are not walking into a brighter future. They are walking into the same psychological traps they have been setting for years. They are fundamentally unable to learn from the loss of a relationship because, to them, there is no lesson to be learned about their own behavior. They only learn that they need a new target. Consequently, they are destined to repeat these 5 stages over and over again with every subsequent person they encounter. The tragedy of their existence is that they are locked in a prison of their own making, where the need for external validation is so severe that it prevents them from ever achieving the intimacy, connection, or stability that they are so desperately trying to simulate. When you recognize that they are not winning or moving on in any meaningful way, but are instead trapped in an unending, exhausting cycle of performance and pursuit, the power they once held over your psyche begins to dissolve. You are moving toward integration, self-discovery, and the ability to form healthy, reciprocal bonds, while they are merely resetting the board to begin another hollow game. The regret they might occasionally project is never a regret for the loss of you as a person, but a frustration at the loss of their primary functional source. By stepping out of their orbit, you have reclaimed your reality from their distortion field, leaving them alone with the only thing they have ever truly had, a reflection that they can never truly see and a void they can never truly fill. The seventh stage of the narcissistic experience following a discard is marked by the onset of a profound, calculated indifference that serves as a final, desperate shield for their fragile ego. When they reach this point, they have fully internalized the reality that their previous attempts at manipulation, the anger, the bargaining, and the smear campaigns, have failed to bring you back under their control. To admit that they have lost, you would be to admit a failure of their own power, a concept their psyche is fundamentally unable to process without collapsing into deep, unmitigated shame. Therefore, they construct a cold, artificial wall of apathy. This is not the serenity of someone who has processed an ending. It is a performance of total detachment, designed to rewrite the history of your connection, to make it appear as though you never held any real significance in their life at all. In this phase, they will go to great lengths to demonstrate that you have been effectively erased. This may manifest as blatant public displays of unconcern, the deliberate omission of your name from their life story, or acting as if your shared history is entirely irrelevant. By treating you as if you are a stranger, they are attempting to perform a psychological coup, aiming to convince both themselves and any onlookers that your departure was not a rejection of their character, but rather a trivial event of no consequence. It is an act of extreme defensive posturing. They must forget you, or at least pretend to, because remembering you, and the fact that you successfully walked away, stands as a living testament to their lack of power. This calculated indifference is the ultimate projection of their inability to handle human reality. While a healthy person might feel sadness, nostalgia, or even resentment after a breakup, they at least acknowledge the impact of the person who left. The narcissist, however, cannot afford this luxury. To acknowledge your impact would be to validate your agency, which contradicts their need to be the sole architect of their reality. By erasing you, they attempt to restore the balance of their own grandiose narrative. They act as if they have won by being the one who moved on first, or by being the one who never really cared. It is a hollow victory, a performative lie told to keep the crushing reality of their own hollowness at bay. They are not over you. They are simply running from the evidence that their mask failed. The final stage, the inevitable cycle, is the ultimate reality check for anyone wondering if their absence triggered a genuine awakening. It is crucial to internalize that for an individual with this specific personality structure, the concept of regret is entirely functional, never emotional. They do not experience the pangs of remorse that come from hurting someone they loved, nor do they reflect on their own behavior to find areas for self-improvement. When they feel regret, it is merely the frustration of a system losing its fuel source. They regret the inconvenience, they regret the loss of their primary object, and they regret the dent you have left in their carefully curated narrative of perfection. This is not the remorse of a person who recognizes they have caused pain. It is the irritation of a user who has lost their favorite tool. Because their ego is so fragile and their need for external validation is so constant, they are trapped in a perpetual loop of seeking new supply. The moment you leave, the vacancy you create is simply an empty slot that must be filled as quickly as possible. This is why you see them move on with such unsettling speed. It is not because they have moved toward health. It is because they are incapable of being alone with their own thoughts, which are often filled with the very shame and inadequacy they have spent their lives projecting onto others. Their trajectory is not a progression, but a repetition. Every new person they meet is just another iteration of the same cycle. The initial idealization, the slow-motion devaluation, and the eventual discard once that person inevitably starts to notice the cracks in the facade. By stepping out of this cycle, you have effectively broken the game. You are no longer providing the feedback loop they require to function, which leaves them constantly searching for someone else to serve as their mirror. Their regret will never lead them to your door for a sincere apology, because that would require an acknowledgement of their own brokenness, which is the one thing their psyche will fight to the death to avoid. Instead, they will continue to recycle the same patterns, the same lies, and the same manipulations with their new target, forever chasing a sense of wholeness that they can never actually achieve. Your peace is found in knowing that the cycle never ends for them, but it has officially ended for you, and that is where your true liberation begins. Ultimately, the cycle of the narcissist is not a journey toward enlightenment or change, but a repetitive, hollow loop defined by the desperate need to sustain a false image. When you walk away, you aren't just ending a relationship. You are stripping away the protective layer of validation that allowed them to function. This triggers a cascade of reactions, from disbelief and rage to performative indifference, that are all aimed at one thing: protecting their fragile ego from the terrifying reality of their own emptiness. The most important takeaway is that you were never the problem, and you were never responsible for their emotional regulation. Their inability to process your departure as a normal life event and their compulsive need to replace you immediately proves that they never truly saw you as an equal partner. They saw you as an object of utility, and your value to them was entirely tied to your ability to serve their ego. Once you remove yourself from that equation, you reclaim your autonomy and leave them trapped in their own cycle of imitation and manipulation. True liberation comes when you stop searching for their remorse and stop waiting for them to acknowledge the truth. They cannot offer you the closure you desire because they lack the self-awareness to admit their own role in the dynamic. By detaching, you break the mirror they were using to avoid looking at themselves. You have moved on to a reality where your worth is no longer determined by their opinion or their projections. The final, most powerful victory is not found in their regret, but in the peace of mind you gain by stepping out of their orbit and refusing to participate in a game that was designed to diminish your humanity. You are not a footnote in their story. You are the author of your own, and you have finally reclaimed your pen.